Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A husband rescued one man and gave him a job in their home with his wife, but what did it turn into? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! Every person you trust, you hand them a knife. It can either protect you or destroy you. I sat there, holding a photograph of me with my wife in my hands, and this quote kept running through my mind. I can't remember who wrote it, some writer perhaps, but it stuck with me from many years ago, even though I didn't give it much importance back then and even forgot about it for a while. But now, after an unpleasant incident happened to me, I deeply and fully understood its meaning. For as long as I can remember, I've always been trusting and kind-hearted. I believed in the goodness of people, despite witnessing how cruel and cynical they can be. This belief blinded me so much that I couldn't see the deception right under my nose. This happened about a year ago. I remember driving home from work on a warm and nearly windless day in May. Despite the gentle breeze, I felt a draft coming through the open car window. As I drove through the streets, I occasionally noticed pedestrians, each lost in their own world, some deep in thought, others chatting on their phones, and some waiting at bus stops, watching for buses to arrive. When I turned into an uncrowded populated alley, mostly lined with trash bins and the side wall of a factory, I noticed a person lying on the ground among the scattered garbage near one of the bins, bleeding profusely. He weakly moved his hand, attempting to signal that he was still alive and in need of help. I hit the brakes and got out of the car. Approaching cautiously, I examined him closely, noticing numerous bruises on his body and 2 stab wounds on his side. The man made a sound softly and I crouched down, trying to hear him speak. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked him, but he only groaned again in response. So, I circled around and tried to lift him to carry him to my car, intending to rush him to the nearest hospital. As I pulled him, he groaned even louder. The pain must have been excruciating. "Hang in there, buddy. We're getting you help. We'll be at the hospital soon. Just hold on," I reassured him, placing him in the back seat. I quickly found a towel under the seat, which I always kept handy, and applied it to his wound. "Here. Hold this. Press as hard as you can." I didn't know what had happened to him, but I couldn't just leave him there bleeding. Soon, I was driving toward the hospital, occasionally trying to engage him in conversation through the rearview mirror, but he remained unresponsive, only groaning. I genuinely felt sorry for him. No one deserves such a fate. When I finally parked in front of the hospital entrance, I shouted for help and, not waiting for paramedics, began pulling him out of the car. His blood had significantly stained my car seat during the ride, but at that moment, I paid no attention to it. My priority was to assist the injured man. Medical personnel quickly arrived and took him from my hands, placing him on a stretcher. A doctor met them in the hospital lobby and immediately began examining him. Meanwhile, one of the nurses detained me to answer a few questions and fill out a form, even though I had no idea who the man was. She asked me to provide my contact information, explaining that the injuries on the man I brought in indicated a crime, and they might need to get in touch with me or involve the police. While I didn't want to get further involved, I still complied with her request. It seemed sufficient to me that I had already delivered him into the capable hands of the doctors who would continue to care for his life. As it later turned out, this man had no identification on him, and after the surgery, he remained unconscious for a couple of days. During this time, the police contacted me and questioned me about the incident. I shared everything that had happened, not knowing how else I could be of assistance, but for some reason, they asked me not to leave town for the time being. I agreed, as I had no immediate plans to go anywhere. However, the piercing look from the police officer who questioned me seemed slightly suspicious and unsettling. No, I didn't think they would try to pin everything on me, and why would they? But just in case, I searched among my old records for the contact information of a good lawyer a friend had recommended to me. After the police visit, I received a call from the hospital. The nurse informed me that the man I had brought in had regained consciousness and was eager to speak with me. He wanted to thank me and look his rescuer in the eyes. At first, I hesitated, citing being busy and such, but the nurse insisted, and I agreed to visit him. "Where are you heading so late?" my wife asked as I got ready to leave for the hospital. "Oh, the hospital called. They wanted me to come over." "But why?" Haven't you had enough trouble with the police? What do they want from you again? The guy I helped wants to see me. I thought I'd pay a visit to the person I saved. Do you want to come along? I offered. No, I don't feel like going anywhere. I'm a bit tired after the day. But you go if you want. Maybe take him some fruit? I'll just go and come back right away. I kissed my wife and left the house. Soon enough, I found myself back at the same hospital. At the nurse's station, I identified myself and asked which room my rescued acquaintance was in. The nurse promptly provided me with the room number and even escorted me there while giving me an update on his condition. When I entered the room, I saw a man in his mid-30s lying on the bed, his torso bandaged, and a few band-aids on his face. On the way, the nurse had told me that fortunately, his wounds weren't as deep as they initially thought, and they managed to save him despite significant blood loss. I felt a sense of satisfaction for having helped him and was now eager to inquire about his well-being and learn more about who he was and how he had ended up in such a situation. Is this him? The patient asked the nurse when she nodded, and he greeted me. Oh, it's nice to see you. I'm Michael Barbara. I'd like to thank you. I'm sorry for causing you any inconvenience. I was glad to help. My name is Adam. Adam Walker. How are you feeling? Thank you. I'm much better now. It's just that the nurses keep poking me with needles. Tell me, Adam, how can I repay you? I won't be here forever, and when I leave, I'd like to somehow express my gratitude to you. No need for that. I'm glad you're feeling better. Have the police been here? They've been pestering me, hoping I might know you in some way, as they couldn't find any identification on you. Yes, they came this morning. One of them was quite unpleasant. I've already told them everything, he said, apparently noticing my inquisitive look, and continued, but you, I suppose, would also like to know what happened to me, right? Well, it's not really my business. I'm just glad I could help. Wait a minute. I'd like to share my sad story with you. You have the right to know, he insisted. And Michael began to recount how he lived with his mother in a poor neighborhood. He had recently found a job as a laborer at the market, closer to home. Since his mother had fallen ill and he needed money for her medication, he had borrowed some money from acquaintances. However, when he received his paycheck and went to repay the debt, they demanded repayment with exorbitant interest. He didn't have that kind of money, and when the time came for the next payment, they demanded even more. So, he started arguing with them, and they beat him severely, stabbing him several times before tossing him aside, leaving him to die. That's when I found him injured near the dumpster in a remote alley that day. His story saddened me, and I found myself wondering why the world could be so unjust to some people, especially someone who was just trying to help his sick mother. I felt even more sorry for him and wanted to visit him a few more times. I had grown up in a poor family myself, and I understood how tough it must be for him. I offered to partially cover his medical expenses since he didn't have insurance. You're so kind to me. I don't know how to thank you. If you want, when I get out, I can work for you. I can do a lot of things, I promise. You won't regret it, he pleaded. Just focus on getting better, Michael. We'll see about that later, I replied. I bid him farewell and headed toward the exit. My conversation with him reminded me of dialogues from English novels between gentlemen. He was so courteous and tried to ingratiate himself, to the point where his speech seemed slightly rehearsed for a moment. But his appearance was so pitiful, and I simply believed him. I arrived home late in the evening. My wife, Dolores, was already waiting for me with dinner. I could smell the aroma of her signature dish as soon as I walked in, and she greeted me almost at the doorstep. Why did you take so long? She asked when I entered. I came as soon as I could. Is it a special occasion? It smells delicious. No, not really. We received some humanitarian aid today, and there was a lot of meat. They allowed each employee to take some home because today was one of those rare occasions when the food wouldn't fit in our refrigerators. So, I decided to cook a dish. How's that man doing? Is he better? She continued to inquire. Yes, he's improving. I met him today. Poor guy, he has such a sad story, I replied. What happened to him? I briefly recounted his story to my wife, and she empathetically clasped her hands. Oh, dear. He's truly a poor soul, she said. Yes, I felt sorry for him too. I just don't understand why you agreed to pay for his medical treatment. We don't have that much money. You could have contacted a volunteer organization, like ours, and they would have helped him. Don't be like that, I interrupted her. We have enough. And that man nearly died trying to help his sick mother. But we have our son's education to think about. We need to support him. And we were planning to do some repairs this year. Did you forget? She replied. Why are you being so stingy? I asked. I'm gonna go wash up. You start setting the table. I'll be right back. Dolores went into the kitchen, and I headed towards the bathroom, stopping by the bedroom to take off my jacket and put on a light t-shirt. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, and when I took it out, I saw that the battery was almost dead. I went over to the nightstand to plug it into the charger. There, my wife's phone was already lying. I checked that it was fully charged and unplugged the charger. As I connected my phone, a message arrived on my wife's phone. On the lock screen, I caught a glimpse of the phrase, "Sorry for the missed meeting." Strange message. Who's M? I thought, as I didn't know anyone among Dolores's acquaintances whose name started with M. My hand instinctively reached for her phone again, wanting to read the message one more time, just to make sure I hadn't misread it. But the phone was locked. That also struck me as odd because my wife had never used a lock on her phone before. Someone messaged you, I said as I returned to the kitchen, holding her phone. Oh, thanks for bringing it. I completely forgot about it, she smiled. She took the phone and started going through the messages. Why are you keeping something from me? I asked. What? She replied, momentarily pausing her reading. Why did you start using a lock? Do you have secrets from me? I repeated my question. Oh. No. What are you talking about? It's just that sometimes at work, I leave my phone to charge, or I forget it in my coat. So, my colleagues recommended that I put a lock on it so that no one can snoop around. You know, it's just basic security for my personal information. I wouldn't want just anyone going through my photos, she explained. Her explanation seemed logical to me. And who's M? I continued to inquire. M? What M? She asked. Oh, don't pretend. I saw the message was from M. Oh, that's my colleague, Marie. She recently joined our team. Really? Why did you need to meet up? Dolores seemed to realize that I had read the entire message, and her eyes darted around the kitchen as she searched for answers. She even stumbled over her words a bit, but I couldn't understand why. What could be so secretive about meeting a friend? Well, we just wanted to meet up for some shopping. Yeah. I suggested we go shopping together. But she never showed up. That's all. Why are you interrogating me like this? I just asked. Let's eat. Did Derek call? He was supposed to call today, right? Yes, he called. Just when you were at the hospital. Everything's fine with him. He said he'll come visit during the holidays. He still has some exams to take, and then he'll come home, Dolores told me during dinner. I was relieved to hear that our son was doing well, and I couldn't wait for the holidays when he would be able to visit us. A couple of weeks later, Michael called me and said that he was being discharged from the hospital. I had visited him several times during his stay, and we had become somewhat friends. He turned out to be quite friendly and pleasant to talk to. After the visits, I would come home and share the news with my wife. She was happy that my new friend was on the mend, but sometimes I noticed that she was sad and even a little nervous, as if she was in some kind of trouble. But when I asked her what was wrong, she would avoid answering and say that she was just tired at work. I realized that volunteering wasn't always easy, and I tried to support her as much as I could. She decided to choose this job a couple of years ago when she saw how many people in need there are in the world. In the meantime, Michael had persuaded me to give him some work. He wanted to thank me so much, and I thought I could do something to help, so I decided to offer him some work in the garden, especially since I hadn't had time to do it lately. He gladly accepted my offer and said that he would watch every leaf. And when I came to see him on the day of his discharge, I offered him to come straight to our house, to look at his future work and to eat a normal home-cooked meal, and I also wanted to give him some food to take home so that his mother could try it too. I informed my wife about the arrival of the future employee and asked her to prepare a guest room for him on the first floor, and to prepare more food. She tried to talk me out of it, saying that it was not quite wise to invite strangers into the house. But what struck me the most was that when we arrived home and I introduced my friend's wife to her, she suddenly felt sick and fainted. I was concerned when Dolores suddenly fainted and collapsed onto the floor. I rushed to her side, lifted her up, and carried her to the couch. Michael, who had been standing frozen in the doorway, watched me, afraid to move. "Why are you just standing there? Go to the kitchen and bring some water," I shouted at him. "Oh, yes. Right now." "Just a minute," he stammered, finally snapping out of his shock and heading in the direction I had pointed. A minute later, he returned with a glass of water. During that time, I had been gently patting my wife's cheeks, trying to bring her back to consciousness. When I splashed some water on her face, she began to regain her senses. "Hey, Dolores. What happened? Are you okay?" I anxiously asked. "What?" she replied, looking around and trying to sit up. "You lost consciousness." "I was about to call an ambulance," I said, reaching for my phone in my pocket, but she stopped me. "No need. I'm fine. I guess it's because of the heat. It's so stuffy today." She glanced at the man standing nearby. "This is Michael. I told you he'd be coming over today. He's the person I visited in the hospital." "I understand," she whispered quietly. "Hello," Michael politely extended his hand to her. But she didn't respond. She continued to rub her throat, took the glass of water from me and began to greedily sip the water. She glanced at me, then at our guest, and then just stared at the floor. I tried to understand what had suddenly made her feel unwell and continued to persuade her to have a doctor come and check on her, but she still refused and said she was feeling much better already. Then she went to the kitchen and started setting the table, moving around the kitchen trying to avoid making eye contact with either me or Michael. In the meantime, I continued our conversation with him, telling him a bit about our home and his future responsibilities. "So, if you want, you can stay here overnight. We've prepared a room, so you can save on transportation." "Is that really necessary?" My wife interrupted our conversation. "If his mother is so ill, she probably needs care, right?" "Yes, but she's not entirely helpless. She can go to the store or the pharmacy if needed," Michael replied. "Besides, she's already feeling much better. The last time the doctor examined her, he said she was improving." "I'm glad to hear that about your mother. Maybe Dolores is right? Look for yourself. There's work here for a couple of weeks, and you can manage your time as you like. We just want the yard to look nice for our son's arrival." "Of course, Adam. In 2 weeks, you won't recognize your yard." We continued our meal, discussing a few more details about Michael's future work. Dolores ate quickly and wanted to leave, but I asked her to pack some snacks in containers and give them to Michael to take home. "Listen, Michael. I can't forget about those people who did this to you. Why don't you want to tell the police who they are? They'll come after you again, and I can't hide you here forever. You know, Adam, I live on that street. And you're right that you can't hide me forever. Even if they're arrested, they'll eventually get out, and they'll be even angrier than they are now. Plus, they have friends who won't be happy with me either. I'll figure it out on my own. I'll work, earn money, and pay them back. Well, as you wish. My job is to ask. So, today, just relax. Take care of your mom. Tomorrow, you can come and start working. We'll leave a key for you under the back door plant. You'll have access to the kitchen and your resting room. There's a shower there if you need it. Adam, you're like an angel who descended from heaven into my messed up and aimless life." I escorted Michael and returned to my wife. During the meal, I noticed that she ate very little and looked very pale while sitting at the table. Genuinely concerned for her, I began asking about her well-being again. What are you picking on? I told you it's because of the heat. It's all past now. I just need to rest. Still, I insist that you see a doctor. Health is not something to joke about. Your son will arrive, and you'll be fainting here. I tried to make a joke. Oh, just leave it, she grumbled. How much longer can you go on about this? I'm starting to feel nauseous. Hey, Dolores. What if you're pregnant? This thought suddenly crossed my mind. What are you talking about? What the happening is a pregnancy. I should be a grandmother by now. And you're talking about me being pregnant. Ugh, she continued to grumble and walked into the bedroom. As for me, I sat thoughtfully on the couch and daydreamed about the possibility of another little person in our home whom I would love just as much as the rest of my family. The next day, I got ready for work early. As usual, Dolores made breakfast for me, but this time she didn't sit down at the table with me. And when I asked her how she was feeling, she responded dryly that everything was fine and that I should stop fussing. At work, I couldn't concentrate for long, as thoughts about my wife and the possibility of her being pregnant kept bothering me. After a few hours, I called her on her mobile phone and asked again if everything was all right. But once again, all I heard from her were a few curses, and she threatened not to talk to me for a week if I asked again. I found her behavior strange. Yes, she had been a bit difficult before, but now her irritability had increased significantly, and although I decided not to bother her further with questions to avoid an argument, I still couldn't help but worry. When I came home, she was sitting on the bed in the bedroom, lost in thought. On the way home, I noticed that Michael had already started his work, and the lawn was looking neater and more beautiful. But he was not in the house. Before I found my wife in the bedroom, I wandered around the ground floor and called her and Michael several times. When I entered the bedroom, she was just staring at the floor, not even noticing my arrival. Dolores, has something happened? I decided to repeat my question. After that, she turned to me and looked at me as if she had committed a crime and was afraid to confess. I noticed that she was holding something in her hands. Adam, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. I've been recalling recent events, and I've decided to check. I'm not completely sure yet. I really need to see a doctor. But she handed me a small test tube. I took it and realized it was a pregnancy test with 2 clear red lines. Oh my God, Dolores! Really? I exclaimed joyfully. Why are you so happy? I'm already so old. It might be too late for me to have a child. I don't know. I'm so scared. I rushed to hug and kiss her, but she pushed me away. Stop it. I'm feeling nauseous. I sat down next to her, smiling and rejoicing that my suspicions had been confirmed. But Dolores remained in a melancholy mood, and I couldn't understand why she was so opposed to it, considering that she had already given birth and knew what to expect. Darling, this is just wonderful news. Maybe you shouldn't work for now? Huh? It's not that easy there, and you're in this condition. I strongly suggest you stay home now. Tomorrow, I'll go with you to the hospital. I'll arrange it with work. What's gotten into you? Relax. It's not confirmed yet. These tests can be wrong. While Dolores protested, I couldn't stop rejoicing and hoping that the test result was accurate. For some reason, I really wanted to hold a little baby in my arms again, to start raising them from a young age, teaching them the ways of the world, playing baseball with them in the backyard, just like I did with my eldest son. But he had already grown up and would soon start his adult life. I could have another chance to care for a little one. In the morning, I called work and arranged for a day off. Dolores and I were about to leave when Michael arrived. He probably didn't expect to find both of us at home, but he warmly greeted us. I was just about to share the joyful news with him when my wife interrupted me and asked me to keep quiet for now. When he asked what was going on, she responded rudely, telling him not to meddle in our affairs. We went to the clinic, and there the doctor confirmed that Dolores was indeed pregnant. When he announced it, she paled even more. The doctor reassured her that it was normal and hurried to reassure her that the pregnancy should go smoothly, despite her age. But as a precaution, he asked her to take a few more tests to get the complete picture. I stayed with her throughout the examination, only stepping out briefly to grab some coffee while she was being examined. Upon returning home, I couldn't contain my excitement and announced the joyful news during lunch to our new friend, Michael. He took it in stride, congratulating us. However, Dolores sat with a displeased look on her face, clearly disapproving of my indiscretion. After lunch, Michael thanked us for the delicious meal and left to continue his work. My wife, on the other hand, gave me a bit of a scolding for revealing the news. "Why are you so upset?" "I was just sharing our happy news. Michael is no longer a stranger to us." "Why do you react this way?" "Because..." She began to shout, but then stopped abruptly, clearly afraid of saying too much. "What?" "Speak. What are you so afraid of? Tell me now that you've started." "Nothing. It's just a nuisance. Leave me alone." I saw her anger, even though I didn't understand the reason behind it. Perhaps her pregnancy was affecting her mood? However, I decided to stop the conversation, especially since we weren't alone in the house. I went into my office, needing to calm down after our argument, as my feelings had been hurt too. I occupied myself by browsing the internet on my computer, scrolling through my social media feed to distract myself and see what was new. However, I soon grew tired of this activity, especially since I didn't find anything interesting. Closing the page, I leaned back in my chair and let my thoughts wander, looking out the window. Through it, I had a view of our garden, and soon I noticed that Michael was nowhere to be seen, and the lawnmower had stopped buzzing. When I realized he wasn't working, I became curious and left my office to find out what had happened. By this time, I had calmed down a bit. Walking on the soft carpeted floor, I reached the kitchen as I wanted to go out through the side door to find him. However, as I approached the entrance to the kitchen, I overheard Dolores and Michael discussing something, and their tone was clearly tense. I was now grateful that I had laid that rug, which allowed me to approach them unnoticed. Hiding behind the wall, I decided to eavesdrop on their conversation. "I'm begging you. Don't." Dolores was talking, and I got a little worried. "Michael, if he finds out, we're both dead. You realize that, don't you?" "But Dolores, how can you deny it? I'm just sure the baby is mine. And I promise you that I can take care of." The words "the baby is mine" made me furious. In that instant I didn't understand why or how, but I realized that Dolores had cheated on me, for why would she have discussed it with our gardener? Not immediately I remembered the moment when I had brought him into the house. Now I understood why she felt sick so abruptly and why she was so nervous. I didn't listen to any more of their continued conversation and stormed into the kitchen. What is that supposed to mean? I boiled. "Adam?" Dolores stood up from her chair. "What are you doing? Did you get it wrong?" "What'd I get wrong?" "You idiot. I helped you, I saved you, I gave you a job, I believed you were in need. And you, idiot." Before he could say anything back, I jumped in with my fists. But he wasn't a bad fighter, and in the process he gave me a few bruises too. Dolores hid behind the door and peered out, watching us. I wasn't going to stop. At some point I managed to grab him and topple him onto the kitchen table, causing it to break and the dishes on it to shatter all over the kitchen. "Idiot. I'd stab you myself right now. I shouldn't have helped you then. You should have stayed in that tank and rotted," I told him, standing over him. He started to get up, wiping the blood from his broken nose, and wanted to pounce on me, but I grabbed him by the shirt again and pushed him back against the kitchen cabinets. I didn't notice at the time that there were knives drying there after Dolores had done the dishes, and that the rack had turned in the process of the fight. After my shove, Michael froze in place and slowly lowered his gaze to his stomach. Then he also slowly dropped to his knees, and as he fell, I noticed that there were 2 knives sticking out of his back. Dolores, who had been watching us the whole time, shrieked loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. I turned around and looked at her. She was looking back and forth at me, then at the body lying there, dripping blood. I realized I had unwittingly committed murder, but how should I proceed? Dolores rushed over to him, and I realized that she cared more about that miserable idiot than she did about our family. But my anger was still raw, Michael's words, "my baby," still echoing in my ears. I walked over to her and grabbing her by the hair, I dragged her away from the corpse over the splinters and sat her down near the wall. She was crying and looking at me fearfully. I crouched beside her and spoke in a low, ominous whisper. "Do you want to live? Do you want this child to be born?" She only nodded silently in response. "Then remember, you will forget everything that happened here. Forget you ever knew him. And if you tell anyone, you'll wish you'd never been born. I have connections. So don't doubt it." She kept looking at me and crying. "Do you understand?" I shouted. Then she nodded her head. I told her to clean up everything here, and I carried Michael's body to the basement. Waiting until nightfall, I loaded his body into the trunk of my wife's car and drove to that same desolate alley where I had found him before. Making sure there was no one nearby, I left his body near the same dumpster. When I returned home, I saw Dolores sitting in the kitchen, crying. Her hands were covered in blood. I looked at her and noticed that blood was also flowing from under her skirt. She was pale, and upon seeing me, she lost consciousness. I rushed her to the hospital. I didn't know what was wrong with her, but I didn't want another dead body in the house. Besides, if Michael's injuries could be attributed to a fight among thugs, especially since this wasn't his first such incident, I would have a hard time explaining my wife's death. After a couple of hours, the doctor came out to speak with me. He informed me that she had suffered a miscarriage but was in stable condition herself. I waited until she regained consciousness, and when she opened her eyes, I told her that she had lost the baby. I also reminded her to keep quiet if she cared about her life. However, she responded that she had nothing left to lose and that she intended to tell the police everything. "Do you remember whose car you used to transport the body?" I asked her. "There are traces of him on it. Do you think they'll put me in jail?" "No. They'll put you in jail. Do you think our son will forgive you for this?" She looked at me in fear, her pulse quickening, and she began convulsing. The monitor alarmed, and a nurse rushed to her side. She shouted that Dolores had suffered a heart attack. More paramedics arrived and began trying to save her. In a matter of minutes, it was all over. They had managed to save her. I left the hospital and went home, uncertain about what would happen next. But it seemed that my words had a profound impact on Dolores because, after being discharged from the hospital, she never told anyone anything. She even chose to leave me, saying that she couldn't stay in that house any longer, and I let her go. All that remained of her were memories and a few photos. Now the only thing I was sure of was that she would keep this secret for the sake of our son, for his future. Since then, I haven't trusted anyone again. What do you think of our story today? Seems to me the husband was totally right. He wanted to know what was going on between his wife and Michael, but when he found out it got worse, I don't know who was right or wrong. What do you think? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.